Are we audible? Yes. Yay. Okay. Neato. Well, welcome all our colleagues online. You haven't missed anything. It's so quiet. Yeah. Susan, we're wondering if that's something on your end. The other people are saying yes. Okay. So static is back? Yeah. Jackie, maybe we should. Yeah. Just tell them we're very sorry and we'll reschedule. I know. Great. All right. All right, let's give this a shot then. At least some people seem to be hearing stuff. If we do have any troubles, like I said, we'll go ahead and reschedule and do it again. So yeah, sorry for all the technical difficulties. But again, thanks again for the invitation. And as anyone who's been in the classroom for a while knows, I mean, you just accumulate stories. You accumulate battle scars. You accumulate new skills, all sorts of things. So this talk is really a culmination of things contributed by other friends and colleagues. So I really can't take credit for the whole thing by any means. You know, and I'm sure we'll get some more as we talk today. So I guess where I'd like to start, Jackie, can you move me forward a slide? I'd like to start with what is incivil behavior, because different people will probably define it different ways. There we go. There we go. Excellent. So some behaviors that we might consider uncivil might be things like checking email and phone messages, just general talking inside of class. To kind of step up from there, maybe challenging the instructor, maybe interrupting the instructor in the middle of a course. I have had students raise their voice to me. I've never been threatened, but certainly I have colleagues that did experience that. But the other kinds of uncivil behaviors don't necessarily involve us as a faculty, but involve sort of the environment, the culture of the classroom. And students might be rude to one another. You know, they might interrupt, they might argue, they might harass, threaten. I've had a little experience with the last one, the kissing and groping one. The most striking one was shared by a gentleman that was in the summer session, where he told a story of two women sort of going at it with each other in his laboratory. And neither seemed to mind, but it really wasn't appropriate for the classroom. So all sorts of things come up. I've had people making out in the back of 100 Thomas building, so in that big lecture hall, like I can't see, apparently. So who knows? But something that I think we have to remember, though, are we as faculty ever uncivil to students, or are we as faculty ever uncivil to one another in front of students? I think that's really, really important. So Janelle Malkos and I belong to a group called the Human Anatomy and Physiology Society. And when I posted this question to their listserv, it was interesting. I got a few stories about students' uncivil behavior, but most of it was actually a very strong reaction about faculty being uncivil to students. And I think that's important because we set a standard, and then the students watch that, and they'll tend to model whatever behaviors they see us demonstrate. So we may be teaching things sometimes that we don't even realize we're teaching. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. If you can move me ahead one more, Jackie, thank you. So in the spirit of an ounce of prevention, yeah, just go ahead and hit it, Jackie, okay? How can we help our students learn to be civil behavior? First of all, I think the most important thing to remember is that it is our classroom, and therefore it is up to us to set the example. So things like starting, ending class on time, being prompt with returning assignments, to treat students respectfully, especially with regard to gender, race, religion, orientation, even economics. Not everyone will see the world as we do. Not everyone will filter the things that we say, the same things that we filter them, that we hear them. So I think that's really, really important to keep in mind. And also use humor thoughtfully and appropriately. Everyone has their style. Some people use humor more, some people use humor less. But if you do use humor, I think it's important that you use a type of humor that doesn't create any awkwardness, doesn't make any of your students uncomfortable. I am personally a big fan of self-deprecating humor. I will make fun of myself all day. I tell stories about my family because, again, it's still my little world. My wife used to work at CAPS. She has a private practice now, but one of her clients at CAPS once walked up to her and introduced herself as one of my students and then told her, "You must be a very patient person," because she's heard all these things. But again, it was always me, my family kinds of things. So I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. Another really important thing I think to keep in mind is that your classroom is not a place to make new friends or seek group therapy. I have known colleagues that are going through difficult circumstances and they bring those to the classroom and, maybe they're in pain and they're trying to work through that pain, but I would argue that the classroom is probably the last place to do that. So again, I don't think that's setting a good example, and I think it's opening the door for behaviors in the classroom that you don't necessarily want to see. So I encourage everyone, to really think about what's inside your syllabus. Most of us have probably experienced this, that the syllabus tends to get longer and longer every semester because you accumulate experiences and things that you never thought of before. And I think that's fine. But I think it's important to remember that the syllabus is basically a contract between us and the students. And could you forward me? Thank you. So you can use your syllabus, those policies, to create a positive classroom climate. I think it's important that the syllabus be more than just this is what you can't do and this is what you can't do and here are the penalties if you cross this line. But rather, phrase things in a more positive way again. So it's, this collaboration between you and your students, rather than your students perceiving you just pounding on their heads. Can you forward me again? There was some research, there's actually a number of papers, but this is a nice one, that showed that instructors' verbal and nonverbal signals correlated fairly strongly with the frequency of uncivil problem behaviors inside the classroom. And again, these are things that we can control. So, starting off with a good classroom culture, building a strong and positive classroom culture is things that we can do to prevent them in the first place. If you can move me along, Jackie, that's great, thanks. Okay, so what about the students, okay? Because they certainly play a role in all this. And I think it's really important to, kind of keep this question in mind. Are they more adolescent or more adult? I mean, yes, our students tend to be 18 to 22 years old, and legally they are adults, okay? But developmentally, all right, they are not at the same level as, a grad student, as a faculty member. And again, some other research has shown that the social and emotional gains students make during college are actually greater than the intellectual gains, all right? And if we think of the difference between, a freshman in Bio 110 or, Math 22, and a senior, who has gone through a curriculum successfully, those are some enormous intellectual gains that the students make in 4 years. And again, the social and emotional gains are actually greater than that. So again, I think it's important to keep our audience in mind here. These students, as they're developing, a sense of competence, not only intellectually, but physically and interpersonally. All those things are changing, That's why this age, this time in life is actually so exciting. They're learning to manage their own emotions. Again, they come to us as 18-year-olds, okay, and leave us in their 20s, all right? There's a big difference between that teenager and that young man or woman in their 20s. They're developing a sense of autonomy in that they're separating from their parents, they're separating from, high school teachers and, those kinds of relationships. They're building their own identity. Any of us that have ever heard students talk to one another, know that they're developing and working through all the issues of interpersonal relationships, and they're learning to balance, again, that self-interest with social responsibility. And again, I'm not saying that our students are children, because children tend to be extremely self-interested and extremely self-focused, even to the point of being narcissistic. But they are on that continuum, and they're leaving those childlike, adolescent-like behaviors behind, and hopefully demonstrating and integrating more and more adult behaviors. But it is a process. It doesn't happen magically at 18. It doesn't happen magically at 22. I personally believe that pretty much everyone gets there by their 30s, okay? But we all know people that kind of matured early, and we all know people that matured a lot later, and some of us are those people. So I think it's really, really important to keep in mind that our students' behavior is somewhat of a moving target. Okay? And they probably won't always make the best decisions in every situation. Can you do me again? Thank you very much. So given that that might happen sometimes, what can we do when students cross that line, when their behavior is just unacceptable? First of all, based on everything that I was just trying to describe to you, I highly recommend try not to let it become personal. And I know that is easier said than done. I was sleepy last night, so I went to bed at 10 o'clock. It took me till midnight to fall asleep because I got this really kind of rotten email from a student, and I was just processing it. And I knew that I was taking it somewhat personally, and I was glad that I wasn't trying to type an email at that time because I probably would have typed an email that I would have regretted. So try not to let it become personal. And again, that is a challenge, and I think that's something that we have to remind ourselves of constantly. And keep in mind that the students may not perceive their behavior as a negative thing. Things like texting and emailing and things during class, I have some colleagues that just go nuts over that, okay? Again, this, the culture, the tradition that the students are experiencing before they get to us, maybe that's actually not a negative thing in their eye. That doesn't mean you have to tolerate it, okay? But again, it's just one of those things to remember that it's not necessarily a personal insult to you, or it's not intended that way, okay? But there's nothing wrong with changing it too. So other things like talking during class, exiting and entering the classroom in the middle of class is one of my pet peeves. It drives me nuts, okay? Especially if I'm like in 100 Thomas and like a student walks right in front of me while I'm trying to address everyone else, okay? That drives me nuts. They might not mean it though the way that I perceive it, okay? So that, will hopefully moderate how I handle it. Again, inappropriate displays of affection, interrupting, arguing, okay? All those things I think are perfectly valid areas to set limits and to set boundaries to, okay? But again, don't take it personally, okay? Think of it more as, they need to learn this and I am their teacher, okay? So I think it's important to communicate our expectations as one adult speaks to another, all right? I think it's important to try not to scold, and again, it is tempting because we are in positions of power, and sometimes we're tired, and sometimes we're frustrated, and sometimes we're busy, and sometimes we don't always choose the best words, and we come off as a bit of a badass. And I've got a little testosterone left. I'll admit that feels kind of good, but it's probably not good teaching. Okay, it's probably not good education, and it's not building a positive classroom culture. So again, I think it's something to keep in mind. In my experience, I've been teaching here at Penn State for 20 years now. This is actually the first semester of my 21st year. And I taught at a community college for a couple years prior to coming to Penn State. So I've had lots and lots of students. And in my experience, most students will get in line. 99.999% of students will actually get in line once you point it out to them and say, this is not acceptable. If they don't, then maybe a more formal conversation is going to be necessary. I had a TA come to me once who didn't know what to do with some students. They were actually putting money on the lab bench, daring another student to take a probe that we had been used to dissect the large intestines of a cat. And to be graphic, the probe had been in the cat's anus at one point, and they were putting money on the table for the guy to put it in his mouth, okay? I don't know why, okay? It's a developmental thing. They were guys, so, so there's probably some testosterone poisoning. But he said, don't do it, okay? And they, and then he turned his back, and all of a sudden he hears all this laughter and shouting. The money's gone, and they're all, sitting there like they just ate the canary or something like that. And he didn't know what to do, okay? That was a case where then we had a more formal conversation. where I could sit down with the student and point out, hey, this person controls all the points for you in this class, including participation points, and you just pissed them off, okay? And, and the kid was like falling over himself to apologize to me, but I tried to explain to him, you need to repair this relationship with your laboratory instructor. And he refocused there, and the rest of the semester was fine, okay? It wasn't that he was a bad human being. He was a kid that did something stupid, right? And needed a little bit more formal conversation. And you're going to say something. I'm sorry, and I cut you off. Okay? Like that thing with monkeys on the typewriter. If you give them enough time, they'll type a Shakespearean sonnet. Let me talk long enough, okay? I'll answer all your questions, okay? It might just take, a billion years. And don't hesitate to include other faculty. I know when I started here at Penn State, there was a couple times where I had a conversation that I wasn't really comfortable with, and Dr. Haas sat in on one or two of them with me, and that was nice. I mean, just to have the colleague there, to have another pair of ears there, to get her input, and also, kind of like mom and dad almost, to present, a united front in a situation that, might feel a little bit dicey in that specific context. And please, keep in mind, talk with your colleagues, okay? And that's why I like this so much too, because our colleagues are more than the people in our department. Our colleagues are across, the STEM fields. Our colleagues, when Peggy and Carla come, go into completely different departments. Talk with your colleagues. One of the interesting things I think about teaching in large courses, and I know that math, knows exactly what that means. I have friends that teach what is it? It's a BBH course. She's a psychologist, and for her, a large course is like 60 students, And people in math and biology and chemistry were like, yeah, right, okay, fine, 60 students. Hope you don't kill yourself. People that have seen large courses, just statistically, unusual things will come up more often, okay, having that many students. So they've probably dealt with some unusual things. So don't hesitate to talk to those people, because it's, in my experience, it just makes everything easier if you can tap into someone else's experience and someone else's point of view. And I always come away learning something and happy that I took that time. Can you move this forward, Jackie? Thanks. Oh, sorry. And then the last point, actually, if you can go back. And this one is, I think, really important too. Consider whether or not it's a battle worth fighting, okay? Because some things, quite frankly, aren't. Especially if you do have a lot of students and, research to take care of and, some kind of service thing and a committee and whatever's going on at home and, it's really easy for our plates to become very, very full, and some of the things, it's okay to just let them go, okay? It's not the end of the world, all right? So every battle does not have to be fought, all right? And then it's up to us, to decide which ones are which. But this is an option and should always be on the table, I think. Thanks, Jackie. So all that said, I think it's also important for us to remember that there are limits to what we can be expected to do, all right? I have had students with fairly severe mental health issues that were so interfering with what was happening in the classroom, they were far beyond what I could address as an anatomy and physiology educator. I've had some minor attempts to intimidate me. Again, I have never dealt with a threat, but when we get to the case studies, I will be able to share some examples of that unfortunately some colleagues have gone through. And these are the kinds of things that maybe we definitely need some help with. So who do you speak with? Again, other faculty. I really like the culture that has been developing in the College of Science, where lecturers, instructors, and graduate faculty are, I think, becoming a more and more cohesive group. I think, again, those opportunities to talk with each other, to help each other out, make any of these challenging situations easier to deal with. Academic advisors, Barb DeHart, who runs the biology undergraduate advising office, has been wonderful at times when I've called and said, what's the deal with this student? Has anyone else ever experienced that? And then she goes, oh, yeah, I know that name. And that's, some important input for me to prepare for this meeting with the student. Doug Kavner, our department head in biology, once had a student complain about me directly to him and then called me and just wanted to give me a heads up. In his words, this guy is really scary. So department heads, deans, and certainly the support staff that we have here at the university, 8630395. That's the phone number for CAPS. I have it memorized because I've had more conversations than I can count where I can at least get the student to the point of when I ask, would you be willing to talk to someone about this? This is more than I can help you with as your teacher, but I think it's something that's going to affect class, and I think maybe you need some input from this other person. Would you be willing to talk to a counselor or someone? And as soon as they say yes, my next question is, how about if we set that up now? And I dial the phone right there, and they actually know my voice, and I say, hi, it's John Waters, blah, blah, and I hand the phone over to the student and try to get them that appointment. So, CAPS is really terrific, and obviously, if things get a little bit scary, the University Police, which is 31111, that's another number that we should not be afraid to dial. Again, if we're going into these areas that are beyond what we're trained and really can be reasonably expected to handle ourselves. Okay. So what I'd like to do for really the bulk of this now is talk about some different scenarios. So I'd like you guys to maybe work together in twos or threes, however you want to do it. And I will give you some scenarios, and I'd like you to discuss, the scenario that that I hand you, and then be prepared to discuss and maybe even demonstrate a solution when we all come back together. As you're doing that, I'd like you to think about, what could you do to prevent such a situation from occurring in the first place, since we're all going to leave here and go back into our courses. If it has occurred, does it rise to the level that it's important to address? And if you do address it, how do you think that you might handle it? And then I'd like us to talk. All of these scenarios that I've collected here have actually happened. They were either my personal experiences or the experiences of friends and colleagues in college classrooms. So none of it is actually made up, and a couple of them are kind of extreme. And there's other ones that are much more routine. Yeah, I'd like to break us up. How many people do we have here? Jackie, can you go to scenario 8? So I'll hold one scenario back for our colleagues that are online. I don't know if any of you guys are with other people that you could talk about this, but scenario 8 is the one that I'll give to the online people, and maybe we can get at least a little bit of feedback, okay? So it'll be noisy. So what, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, how about, yeah, can I just hand a scenario out to a couple people? I've got some more, and I've got more copies, and we can double up if we need to. A couple here. There we go. Sure. Make a friend. Somewhere. There we go. There we go. I got one more. If anyone wants an alternate one. If anyone's unhappy with their scenario, if you guys want to break up smaller. Okay, well, I got one more if anyone wants one.
My daughter was supposed to pick up her computer today, and I forgot to bring the UPS.
Okay, guys, back together, and I'd just like to briefly hear your input. Thanks, Jackie. All right, so yeah, let's come back together, and I'd just like to briefly hear from each group, kind of how they might handle this. Let's see, online folks, is it okay if we switch over to the scenario that's being discussed so that you guys can see what we're looking at? Oh, they might still be talking. Okay, maybe we'll just read over our scenarios. Yeah, the group that, yes. Okay, we can do that, sure. So our first scenario is a student is pressing you for more specific information about the content of the final that you will administer in a few days. You offer some general information, but the student becomes agitated and then angry because you will not answer his specific questions. He's frustrated, and as he leaves, he pushes the classroom door open so hard it bangs against the wall. As he walks out, he says, maybe I should bring an AR-15 and a couple extra magazines to the final exam. Several of your students also hear the comment. So this is actually something that a colleague of mine in California dealt with. And I'd like to hear what you guys think. So I'm going to hand you the microphone so that other people can hear.
All right.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay. So I didn't know I'd be representing the group.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't want to rush into that because I was worried the online people were still looking at 8. But
one.
It's 1. There we go.
Okay. So one of our colleagues suggested seeking advice because if you're inexperienced in what resources are available, that certainly would be a way to go. But the other of us felt like contacting the police immediately and letting the police know that follow-up needed to be done with that student. Actually, I got to the end of this when you were reading it just now and was thinking that there also might be some discussion that needed to take place. The students themselves could be pretty upset by that and need to be reassured on some level that precautions are being taken.
I think that's an excellent point. Here, can I borrow that back? Yeah, thank you. My friend who dealt with this, she did exactly what you described, and she did report it to the police. And the police decided, since because of the specificity, I'm not a gun owner, so I'm not as familiar with this. But the term magazine, as opposed to clip, for this particular weapon is actually appropriate. That's the appropriate term. And they felt because it was fairly specific, they actually took it very seriously and ended up removing the student from the class. So yeah, I personally think this is pretty clearly one that we need to bring in extra help. Okay. Right, so the question was, for those of you that couldn't hear it, was there any contact with some sort of school psychological services? I don't recall her sharing that in the email. I think the focus was largely legal, to be honest with you, and that is potentially, a problem with that, with that response. Because, I mean, clearly this is maybe a kid that needs some kind of help. Maybe it happened, but I don't recall it from the email. But I tell you what, if you send me a note, I'll go back and check her email and give you some closure or something like that. But I guess it did end up okay. One sort of odd thing that she did share that happened with this, which is kind of sweet but kind of scary too. Other students had heard this, and she's a fairly popular teacher, and she found out after the final that actually 4 or 5 students came to the final armed because there's a concealed carry. Concealed carry was permissible on that campus, and they came to the final armed and positioned themselves to create a crossfire to protect her, which on the one hand is like, oh, that's so sweet, and on the other hand it's, oh my God, that's terrifying. Yeah, stay in this business long enough, you guys, and you see everything. Anyone have anything to add about this particular one? Yes, please. Yes, she did say that they were involved because there was some sort of disciplinary action. The student was allowed to finish the course, but not with the other students. So a whole new final was scheduled, things like that. And he took the final separately someplace else. So yeah, I think there was some sort of discipline thing, but she didn't tell me if he was expelled or anything like that. Okay. So yeah, that's kind of a scary one. Okay, yeah, can we go on to number 2? I don't want to take too long because the pizza's starting to smell good. All right. So a student that you have a positive relationship with is in your office to argue for a better test score. During the conversation, that person becomes upset because you will not change the grade. As the student is walking out of your office, the student exclaims, "I'd like to punch your face." Okay? And do you know who this is? Yeah, this happened to Denise Woodward in the, this is one that she contributed. So who had number 2? Oh, see, I shouldn't have given it to you because you helped solve that one. Can I give one of you guys a microphone? Sure, go ahead. So what do you think?
So we talked a lot about how to prevent the situation from occurring in the first place. There are things that you can do for how, like if a student's upset about a grade on an exam, there are things that you can do in terms of policies in the class of like having things happen before the conversation. Okay. Like, so for example, having a student submit a written explanation of why they would like a grade change, or when a student turns an exam for a regrade, to provide a better written explanation about exactly on the question of interest why it was graded, exactly how it was graded. And that in the classroom, as a student becomes upset, you can notice their body language of becoming upset. And so you can address it as soon as it happens, say, okay, let's discuss this calmly. But if this does happen, it really depends upon the body language of the student in terms of what response is taken.
Okay. Could you see this as maybe something that doesn't require an additional response, say, that it isn't a credible threat, that it was something said in the moment? Or do you feel that this is something that should definitely be addressed, maybe through some sort of disciplinary action?
No, I really feel like this could either be a conversation with a student about how that's something inappropriate to say, like if it seems not to have been said terribly seriously, or it can be something that requires someone on the chat mentioned the behavioral health management or whatever, threat management.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Yep. All right, so what was our third one? And again, I don't want to take too much time. Oh. Let me move us to the third one. Excuse me 1 second. Play tag team with Jackie here for technology. We're in trouble. Okay, so this is another one that was shared by a colleague about a student perceiving an assignment to read something in the New York Times as political bias, that the instructor was, bringing their political views, by assigning something that is traditionally viewed, I think, or often viewed as, a somewhat progressive or left-leaning publication. Who did I give this one to? Was it you guys? Yeah. Yeah, can you share something?
Sure, yeah,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, there's a couple ways we looked at this. One was preventative. You could perhaps set the assignment up in mind, with this in mind up front. So you could, include questions to the students. Is this biased in your opinion? Or perhaps include other articles from magazines that lean in other directions. So you can kind of set it up so you can potentially avoid this. In terms of the actual situation happening, in real time with the student coming to you upset, we thought that perhaps diffusing the situation by, asking the student what their name is, because in a class of 700, sometimes they're anonymous, they're not even known. So giving it some personal sort of interaction, and then indicating maybe we could get together and talk about this. I'd be happy to talk to you in my office or whatever. So just ways of diffusing the immediate sort of anger of the situation. I don't know if you wanted to add anything more to that.
No, yeah, that sounds very healthy. Something else that the colleague that this situation happened with, they explained to the student why they chose the Times. The Times actually has science editors as opposed to regurgitating articles off of the Associated Press feed. And once the student understood that, she said that the student was much more comfortable. But initially, they had this strong reaction.
I also don't want to water down the passion that students feel. Sometimes controversial stuff can be actually good, to get them fired up or wanting to argue with each other. But,
Thank you. Yeah. So for those of you that maybe didn't hear that, we pointed out that it's important not to water down the student's passion, that it's actually okay for them to have some strong feelings. Again, as long as they're expressed somewhat appropriately. Jackie, can you move us to the next one? And I don't know if we'll have time to go over every one, but there's a few good ones. Actually, this one happened to me. Yeah, who had 4? Yeah, can I hand this to you? Is this something that needs to be addressed?
We said that this would probably be a likely scenario, and I've actually had it happen to me too, but not with Gumby, with a gorilla and a banana that entered 100 Thomas and ran through the hall and then left. And I kind of just laughed it off and said, there you guys, you had your minute break here. All right, let's talk about physiology again. So
I would think that, again, not everything needs to be addressed. Sometimes just let it go.
yes, got a good laugh out of it, and everybody was in a good spirit for the rest of class then.
Thank you, Janelle. Okay. Yes, please. So this is another one that was shared with me, that students are having a loud conversation about something that, might make other people uncomfortable or awkward or things like that. And it's happening in your classroom, so it is therefore part of your classroom climate, whether or not it's something you chose or not. So who had this one? Oh, did you do too? Okay. Sure, go ahead. Okay, thank you.
So we discussed perhaps not doing anything, to just let them have their heated conversation, because strong emotions and opinions are good, and it's before your class time anyway, so it's perhaps questionable whether it's even appropriate to stop a conversation happening outside of class time. But we weren't unanimous on that. That was my opinion.
Okay, what was the minority report?
Well, kind of just consensus in general. We also thought that perhaps just making a brief mention of the conversation, but also encouraging students, would they like to speak with someone from the LGBTA Center to explore their ideas further and so forth. But again, because it happened before class, you don't want to waste too much of your class time on that, but you can still approach the topic and diffuse it a little bit.
No, that sounds, again, like, really outstanding classroom management. Thank you very much. I lost Jackie again. Oh, no, there you are. I didn't even see you. So this is kind of an icky situation where one student is actually feeling threatened by another student. You notice them together, you thought maybe there was a relationship. The one student comes to you and says there isn't a relationship, that she's actually feeling stuck and she's thinking about dropping the course. And again, some of my most intense conversations have happened, in office hours, which is, I think, positive in that students are willing to come and talk with us, but I don't always feel equipped for, the things that come up during office hours. So what did you guys think? Who had this one? Can I hand the mic to you? Yes, what did you guys think?
You want to, or should I? All right, so first of all, our go-to is always ask James Sellers what he would do. So that's what we would start with. And then other than that, it kind of depends on the severity of the stalking, is what we thought. Because if it's minor stalking, which sounds awful, then perhaps you can go through this in a less, like, you could go to a counseling group. You can go to maybe their academic advisors and try to figure out something that doesn't require anybody to drop, and maybe just solve the problem by just, mediating things. But if it's particularly severe stalking, maybe just go straight to the police. That's what we thought.
Oh, and there are a couple of people that want to make comments. So let me bring you since you're right here, let me hand you the microphone.
One quick thought would be to encourage the student to speak with someone in the Women's Resource Center, which we have on campus here in Buki, and also, as the faculty member, try to work with that student to create safe spaces so that in the event that the individual is stalking her or following her, that she has safe exits within your own classroom to escape. And then also, again, the Office of Student Conduct as well as police services needs to be reported on this manner so that they can keep an eye on the individual who's stalking, so that again, they can create the safe environment that this young lady deserves within your course so that she doesn't have to drop out.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the Women's Resource Center. Audra Hickson is the contact person in there, and she's just wonderful. for dealing with us. I'm very, very thoughtful, and I'm glad you mentioned them. Thank you very much. Did you want to add something? Here you go.
Because I think sometimes these are all great ideas and thoughts, but sometimes they're too strong. I think often students don't know how to communicate their needs. And you have a first-year student who has never had a relationship with someone of the opposite gender or the same gender, an intimate relationship, and it's very frightening to have a voice, to say it clearly and put boundaries. So it may be just a matter of working out what the person needs to say to the other student.
All right, let's see. I really enjoy hearing your comments, so I'd still like to go through them. And my apologies to the online people that we don't have virtual pizza to share with you. But if the people here want to start to drift over and go ahead and get a slice of pizza or something, please feel free. You're not prisoners to your chairs. And then we can eat and continue this conversation. Would that be okay, Jackie? Great, thank you. So can you move us to the 8th one? And please, go ahead and... or 7th one. Oh, sorry, the 7th one. So you're leading discussion class, students are texting, they're walking around, they're getting in your way. This has happened to me lots of times. Who had this one? Yeah, you guys? Yeah, could I share your point of view? Either one of you.
Sure, I'll go. Well, this seemed to us like a case of, like you mentioned, it's not necessarily obvious that the student realizes that this is negative. So it's definitely something you need to mention to them if you don't like it, texting or walking out of class for going to the washroom. So this is something I think that should, preventively, you should talk about it early on and repeat it, and many times during class, repeat it that this is not okay. And whenever you see it, you just repeat it nicely, and hopefully the student will get in line. Yeah. So I think this is mostly, this is, yeah, to me it's a bit more straightforward. It's just a question of announcing it clearly to the students that both of these behaviors are not acceptable to you, and then reinforce it every time. So I think that's what we're discussing.
To add? Okay. Yeah, I would tend to agree. Handle this differently. Okay. So our 8th one I gave to our online colleagues, and I'm not quite sure if we can pull this off or not, but I just want to share it with everyone. Yeah, so this one actually happened to one of my teaching assistants in lab. Two students are talking loudly. The conversation becomes heated. They start yelling at each other. And then the classroom instructor, who was an undergraduate TA, told them to calm down and take their seats, and he was ignored. And he was a big guy, too. And he was just ignored. Some language gets tossed back and forth, and one student storms out, and the other one, is just standing there shaking. Any thoughts from someone that can type really, really fast for how they might handle this from the online folks? We'll give them a second. And everyone else here can have pizza. Are you guys grad students in back? I like that you're the first ones to go for the pizza. That is, Yeah. And that never changes. Like, when you become faculty, you still think of pizza that way. Okay, so Agnes shared that she'd asked the remaining student if she can calm down or if they need to go out as well, then deal with it later outside of class. And I think, thank you, Agnes. That's, I think a terrific strategy in that you've taken control of the situation as best you could. I mean, obviously it got out of control, but you were reasserting your control of your classroom. Okay, there might be another one coming up here. Anyone on this end, care to share anything? Okay. All right. Well, I think in the interest of time, we'll keep moving. Oh, wait. Have we got something? Okay. All right. Well, I think in the interest of time, we'll keep going. But, yeah, thank you very much, Agnes. Like I said, I think that's a real dicey one. And my TA ended up coming to me, and, we did exactly what Agnes recommended. We ended up sitting down with the students and following up outside of class. And there was some consequence to that, to not following your instructor's instructions, for lack of a better term, and there was some consequence for the students regarding participation points. We felt that that was appropriate, but we didn't want to destroy them either, because it was, again, a dumb thing that happened in the heat of the moment, that maybe if they're a little bit older, maybe it wouldn't have happened, but it did, and, we dealt with it, and that was the end of it. Can you move us to the next one? Whoops. On 9, yeah. Okay, so this is the students, making out one. Again, I've seen kissing in the back of 100 Thomas. Someone during the summer saw a lot more physical activity like that within a laboratory with 20-some people. So it does come up. Not every day, but it does come up. So how would you guys handle it? Who had this one? You guys? Oh, perfect. Anyone? Go ahead.
So we really figured that the best thing to do is not to draw too much attention to it, to the entire class at least. You don't really want to, but you want to kind of somehow subtly let them know that you can see this and this is not okay, right? So the easiest thing to do is just to kind of walk and stand near them, right? Yeah, so that they hopefully would feel uncomfortable doing what they're doing, and that way it's kind of right. Yeah, so. It doesn't obstruct anyone else's learning. It doesn't actually, it doesn't kind of make you stop class in the meantime. And possibly if you have a TA, they can help you with that as well. Maybe kind of go around to do that. But of course, not everyone has that luxury.
I have to admit that, when it happened in Thomas, I actually called them out. In hindsight, I think your way may have been better. And our colleague from the summer, I think he handled it much more similarly to what you described. Yeah, it's kind of an unusual one. I think we have just one more.
Or did you say to the people that are?
I said, "Hey, you two, cut it out," or something like that. So I didn't use their name or anything, but
I was just going to add that with that making out, maybe they want that attention, and so not drawing attention to it can be useful. And then the next class, you might actually mention something at the beginning of class, so then you're not drawing attention to it. You're just setting a standard of behavior.
Yeah, that need for attention, I think, was very likely a factor, and that's why. In hindsight, I wish I had done what you suggested. That sounds good. Okay, so the last one. You handed back an assignment to your class. Student is very, very unhappy. They say that it's unfair, that you're penalizing the person, you're biased. The other students hear this. There's all kinds of yelling. At the height of her tirade, she kicks over her chair, and then as extra credit, I thought I'd add a little threat issue to this. And again, this is something that was shared with me by another colleague. Imagine that it's a large male student who is pacing outside the hall, seemingly waiting for you. So that makes it a little bit more intense. So what do you guys think? Go ahead.
Well, in the first case, I think a lot has to do with what happens immediately after she kicks over the chair. If you can see in her face that she suddenly realizes, that this action of kicking over the chair, sometimes people will just suddenly realize, oh dear, suddenly I've just done something, and then that situation is, sort of diffused itself, and then all you have to do is, remain calm and keep control of your class, as you were saying, and just, calmly tell her that you'd be happy to discuss this with her at a later time privately. In the second case, now this is a little bit of a different thing. If you really think that you're in danger, you may feel that you need to call the police. Depending on, but they haven't done anything particularly threatening, but I still think that, especially if you are feeling unsafe, if there's a whole crowd of people in the hallway, then maybe that's not the appropriate thing to do. But if this is the end of the day and everyone else has left and it's you and this other person and going to be in the hallway, maybe that's going to be something that, if you feel unsafe, then you shouldn't, just walk out. But so, anyone else have anything to add here? Yeah.
So one thing I'd just say is that when someone's upset, responding with compassion tends to calm them down immediately. Because, anger is just, this anger is coming from a frustration, and the frustration that's being vocalized is that I'm not being acknowledged and I'm being treated unfairly. So responding with compassion shows that, no, you actually do care for the student, and as long as they know that, I think it would make them calm down pretty quickly.
Thank you. Yeah, one thing that I liked about your suggestion is, treating this as professionals, to realize, oh, it was something that was said in the moment. Oh, having a little bit of empathy to calm them down. Personally, I would hope that I could pull that off. It's certainly my goal for myself. But for me, I can also see myself kind of getting caught up in it and perceiving it as a threat and not, and again, processing it as something that's being personally done to me rather than much more objectively like you thought. And again, all of this is easier said than done, but I think that's our goal. And kind of thinking about this stuff a little bit ahead of time and having a chance to talk about these things, I think will make it more likely that we would act more ideally, as you are describing, versus acting more viscerally, as I fear I might sometimes, and make it worse. Sure. Yeah, critical that you're able to maintain an attitude of calm. I absolutely agree. And was there... Yeah, Deirdre. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. I think that's absolutely critical. I hope if this ever happened to me that I was up to the task of maintaining that air of calm. But, if anything good is to come out of that, I think that's absolutely critical. Thank you. And we had another comment here. And let me know if there's anything online, Jackie, okay?
We had both of these scenarios happen.
Oh, gosh, I'm sorry.
At different times. And the first one, she was in the classroom with me. And it was a woman who was unhappy with her grade and was in the classroom, and the rest of the class vanished. She took her out for a walk and got her to calm down and everything. The second one was a guy, and I was teaching at night, and it was the end of class, and he was getting verbally really upset. And I ended up having a whole cohort of students, because we teach teachers who are already teaching, that stayed and walked out to my car with me to make sure that I got out to the car safely for several weeks after that happened. But yeah, the compassion worked with the woman. Compassion did not work with the male student.
Yeah, and it is going to vary. You're right. Jackie, can you scroll so we can see our other comment? Is that from Andrew? Yeah, can I just read his real quick? Okay. Yeah, so Andrew mentioned to the rest of the class, name what just happened and then tell them that we're going to move forward. And yeah, thank you, Andrew. I like that because, again, it's a way to reassert, your authority in that classroom so that you can guide it in the direction that you want to. And I think articulating stuff like that is terrific. And Bajiza mentioned to try to see the student outside of class, yeah, which is what we were just talking about here as well. And speak with them, and try to work through it. Let's see, Andrew, I'm trying to read what you just wrote. There's also comes a time when I have to flex my authority in the classroom. Every action has a consequence, and it is good to teach the student what that means. Yeah, and I've run into that one too. Again, I don't think that we need to protect our students from consequences. I think probably it's best to do that outside of the classroom in a calmer discussion, but I absolutely agree with you, Andrew. Thank you. I've had irate students about grades. She threatened to call the dean to report me. I called the chair instead of a meeting, and then she apologized. So you kind of called her on it. Yeah, I think that's another good example of don't be afraid to bring other people in, okay? We don't have to do all of this by ourselves, that there are people around us to support us. So yeah, thank you, everyone. Jackie, can you just skip over maybe to the last slide? Okay. Yeah. So I think I'm going to cut our discussion short because I know we all have other things to do. Personally, I feel that teaching is a lot like parenting. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. But more the parallels are that you're trying to teach people that you care about. Okay. And I would hope that we all care about our students. So I think it's important to be clear about our expectations, to promptly address anything you see as a problem, including as Andrew pointed out online, that there might be a consequence, there might be, a punishment. I think that's an important message to send. I think it's important that we are consistent, and again, that we don't enter into power struggles. I think that comes up a lot. The exchange that I had with some students yesterday via email, I thought was, trying to draw me into a power struggle. But, in the end, there doesn't have to be a power struggle because it's already my class, all right? So we're already in charge, and I think that's something worth reminding ourselves of. And then finally, to be nice, okay? Because as tempting as it might be to, pound someone into dust, and as satisfying as it might be in the moment, and I will confess that you might feel satisfying, that's probably not going to make it better. So being professional, being nice, I think is really important. Okay, Jackie, can you just put the last slide on? I'd like to thank everyone that made this possible. Jackie and the Center for Excellence in Science Education for kind of pushing me to even do this. This is the second time that I did this workshop, and it's been incredibly enjoyable. So thank you very much. The Department of Biology has basically been supporting me in big ways and small for 20 years now. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the best place to work in the world. And I want to thank the math department as well. I was really flattered to be asked to speak with all of you here. That was just wonderful. So thank you so much. And thank you to our colleagues online as well. I know we were off to a rocky start, and I apologize for that. And thank you for hanging in there with us. And thank you for contributing. I'm not sure if this is the ideal way to have a conversation like this, but hopefully something good came out of it for you guys as well. So thank you very much for your patience and for participating. And everyone here in University Park, enjoy the pizza. So thanks, everybody.